Gira is a character that, for all intents and purposes, I should like. I love an underdog story, and as a little brother, I often find myself relating to these types of characters. At first, I was in love with him.
We have actors! We have actors!
But every single episode after the first, I found myself not liking him quite as much. It's not that I necessarily dislike him, he just stopped being cool. I initially enjoyed that he took on the title of the anti-hero after Racles told him that all of his actions were taken out of the name of greater justice, thus that would make Gira unjust for caring about the civilians. But the stick eventually got old, and to be fair, he did eventually drop it after he finally became the king of Shugadam. But this would all be really excusable if Gira ever got a proper Red Ranger moment. For those of you who don't know, this is a stereotype in Sentai. They talk about an Akiba Ranger. That's honestly where I heard about it.
Some of my favorite examples are when Patron Ichigo talks about justice,
or when Lupin Red gets the Magnum. It's these hype battles where you're supposed to walk away from the show saying, oh, that's why they're the Red Ranger. That's why he's the leader of the team. I know some could argue that King Ohger doesn't have a leader because they're all kings of their individual nations, but I'd like to talk about that one episode from Goseiger, which is also a team that didn't have a clear leader, where Alita essentially solos the main villain. Every time Gira has a moment close to this, he either fails entirely or it's outright stated in the show that it's actually Racles pulling the strings in the back. Gira isn't a bad character. I don't hate him. He's definitely not my least favorite character of all time, but he's also not in my top 5. Speaking of Racles and top 5 characters, he's become one of my favorites in all of Super Sentai, and I'm so happy that I got this reaction on camera.
No way, no way, no way.
I don't even know what to say. He's this cool, calm, collected character that's constantly scheming and just doing the most. The reveal that everything he's done this season was actually all the part of his master scheme was nutty, to say the least. Him saying it's time to save the universe is easily one of my favorite moments in Super Sentai history. I've been thinking about getting that tattooed on my left shoulder blade, to be honest. I normally hate when Toku characters act like they're anime characters. I can't give too many examples because a lot of these fools are fan favorites, but it's always super cringy to me. Initially, Yanma definitely came off that way.
I mean, look at this Final Fantasy ass way he's sitting.
But his story about coming up from the slums and building up his country from ground up gave him a lot of necessary dimension, so to speak. I guess pun intended, since I did call him the anime character of the group, but it's true here. His backstory definitely gave reason for his cocky attitude because he's been through some stuff, so he can back his talk. Himeno honestly was my favorite character early on.
That's bad bitch mentality right there. That's a mentality of a bad bitch.
I like her whole bit about being a selfish royal princess, but it's not about having things handed to her, but more in the way Crystal Girlies talk about manifestation. It's about claiming and seizing what you believe to be rightfully yours because you deserve it, and creating an environment around you that matches the reality that you desire. I've been watching a lot of videos from this YouTuber Malik. I recommend checking out her channel if you're interested in self-improvement stuff, but are too afraid about being red-pilled or falling into the trap of toxic masculinity. I promise it's not like that hopeless spirituality as a lot of other people seem to make it. It's genuinely some interesting stuff, and I feel as though Himeno embodies a lot of the ideas Malik often talks about, like manifesting your reality and creating your ideal life because you deserve greatness, and you can bring those things to yourself through creating the space to do so. She kind of does a lot better job of explaining it. Rita is a fan favorite, and rightfully so. I theorized early on that they were a very damaged character, and that led to them developing this cold personality as sort of a security blanket, accented not only in their country's literal climate, but also their reliance on a stuffed animal. And a lot of that ended up being true. Them being the impartial judge of the group was something I really enjoyed, not only because it made the character so badass, but also because of how well it tied into the theme of politics into the show. If Racles wasn't here, they would easily be my favorite character, not to mention we finally had a purple on the main team. I just love that. Speaking of color schemes, I'm so unbelievably happy to not have a gold or silver 6 this year. I grew up in the era of greens and whites and a bunch of different other colors for 6 Rangers, so going back to this was such a nice change of pace. I really hope Sentai doesn't get boring with the 6 Ranger color schemes again. I adore this suit, but I definitely don't want to have all white 6 Rangers from here on out now that we've taken a break from gold and silver. I want 6th Ranger colors to be impossible to guess. That's what made them so hype back in the day. But but Jeremy as a character had to grow on me. He brought up a lot of philosophical questions to the table that we often don't go into all that much in tokusatsu. Like, I've never really thought about the sentience of foot soldiers before until Jeremy showed up. He was a really interesting character in that regard, and that definitely makes him stand out. He acted as a political representative of the Bugnarok, and it was a great way to set up what would later happen when the Galactic insects showed up. They saw everyone on Terra as less intelligent playthings, much like how the people of Terra saw the Bugnarok. This actually leads quite nicely into talking about the show's insect theme. A lot of these characters are royals in their respective country, thus in terms of the hierarchy of society in Terra, they're all higher than those that serve them. This is seen in how Racles was using his citizens for political gain early on in the season. All the citizens in these nations believed that they were higher beings than the Bugnarok until Jeremy comes in and essentially levels the playing field. Eventually, they're seen as equals, and this is around the time that these fourth dimensional beings show up, who happen to have experience with ruining societies all across the universe. They look at them as these sort of ant farms. Not only does this put these four-dimensional beings above the citizens of Terra, but also the kings. The insect motif is ingrained in the very identity of the show, as the show questions this hierarchy. The shoe gods also being these all-powerful bugs subverses our idea of what an insect is. It plays with the concept of sentience as well as power, both politically and in terms of human spirit, and most importantly, the importance of life and what it means to be alive, and the importance of death in comparison, and how all of that, from a greater perspective, seems utterly meaningless. This is best summarized in the opening of episode 48. The countless stars that shine in the sky. In ancient times, people would connect them to foreign constellations. And those constellations gave rise to stories. People sought meaning from little more than dots in the heavens. But why? Perhaps feeling themselves to be little more than insignificant dots, they yearned for their existence to have meaning as well. And if that's true, do you suppose that your own life has any meaning? Looking back on it, this show had to be the Ohsama Sentai, not only to highlight the political alliance of the Royal Squadron, but also to highlight the motif of royalty and thusly class, and again sentience, and again the importance of life regardless of background. Gira was raised as an orphan, but he turned out to be the rightful heir to the throne of Shugadam, the highest nation in Terra, and ultimately we found out he was this ethereal being. It comments on the dynamics of class as well as the entitlement to basic human rights and so on and such forth. This is also highlighted in Yanma and Kaguragi's rise to power. Oh shit. I just realized I didn't talk about Kaguragi. No shade, I love him as a comedic relief character. There's this motif about him being a farmer with dirt on his hands, as well as a liar whose political allegiance is only tied to whoever can benefit him the greatest at that moment in time, thusly also having dirt on his hands figuratively. He's a great character who again draws up this commentary on politics and human rights and whatnot, and this is actually really well placed here, so I'm not gonna change it. This is a Sentai that was not only entertaining, but also had a lot to say. I was worried initially I wouldn't like this show as much as Dawn Brothers, but ultimately I'd have to say this is objectively one of the most well-made Sentais of all time in terms of story. We're not going to talk about those green screens though. Oh my god, we're not talking about the green screens. Holy fuck.